Most men have simply checked out and walked away from the whole game. And now the women who helped push that reality into existence are waking up to a future that looks nothing like the one they were promised. Stick with me through this because by the end, you will see exactly why men are not coming back to fix it and what that means for everyone involved. If you are enjoying these straight talks that cut through the noise, like the angry guy in the group who finally says what everyone else is thinking, you can show some support by buying me a Red Bull with a one time gift or setting up a monthly pledge using the link in the description. It helps keep these videos coming without any corporate filters. Let me lay this out for you the way I would if we were sitting at a bar with a couple of drinks between us, no hype, no sugarcoating, just the raw truth that has been building for years. Society spent the better part of the last 50 years reshaping how men and women relate to each other, and the results are now impossible to ignore. Feminism pushed hard on the idea that men were holding women back, that traditional partnerships were traps, and that women could have it all on their own terms without compromise. Men were labeled toxic for basic behaviors, accused through movements that painted them as inherent threats, and told in countless ways that their presence was optional or even harmful. Manspreading, mansplaining, the bear versus man in the woods question, all of it added up to a steady message that men needed to be fixed or sidelined. So men listened in their own way. They did not protest loudly or form mass movements in the streets. They simply started walking away, building lives that did not revolve around proving their worth to a system that had turned against them. Think about what that walking away actually looks like in practice, because it is not dramatic or angry for most guys. It is quiet and deliberate. A man in his 20s or 30s notices the patterns early now. He sees friends get burned in relationships where emotional openness gets weaponized later in arguments. He watches as financial contributions are expected without reciprocity. And he learns that the rules keep shifting no matter how much effort he puts in. Instead of signing up for that ride, he pulls back. He invests in himself, his health, his hobbies, his simple routines that bring real peace. He sleeps better, eats better, spends time with friends who do not drain him, and finds satisfaction in things like video games, personal projects, or just quiet evenings without constant demands. This is not giving up on life. It is choosing a version of life that does not treat him as a disposable provider or emotional punching bag. And the data backs it up. Younger men, especially, are rejecting the progressive scripts that were forced on them, showing more conservative views on relationships and family than previous generations, not out of hate, but out of a clear eyed assessment of fairness and self preservation. Women who rode the wave of those cultural messages are now hitting a different reality as time moves forward without mercy. Over half of women over 40 are on antidepressants just to get through the days. And that statistic alone should stop you cold because it reveals a deep unhappiness that no amount of career success or girl power slogans can mask. They talk openly now about the loneliness that creeps in during holidays when everyone else has family around and they are the single one at the table. They describe scrolling through social media filled with images of what they passed up, realizing that the boss babe lifestyle did not deliver the fulfillment it promised. Many admit they waited too long, focused on the wrong priorities, and now face the prospect of aging without the support, companionship, or children that once seemed guaranteed or at least optional. It is not just talk. Studies and personal accounts pile up, showing regret over not marrying earlier, not having kids, and believing the narrative that men would always be there waiting when they finally decided to settle down. But men are not waiting. They have found something better in their independence, and they are not looking back with any urgency to rescue a society that labeled them the enemy for so long. This shift did not happen overnight, and it is worth walking through how we got here so the picture stays clear. Go back a few decades, and the messages were different. Men and women had complementary roles that, for all their imperfections, created stable families and communities. Feminism reframed that as oppression, encouraging women to pursue careers first, delay family, and view commitment as secondary. At the same time, cultural forces amplified every male flaw while downplaying female accountability. The result was a generation of women who entered their 30s and 40s with impressive resumes but empty homes, wondering where the good men went. Meanwhile, men adapted by lowering their expectations of partnership and raising their standards for personal peace. They saw the divorce rates, the family court biases, the social shaming, and they chose solitude over repeated risk. It is a straightforward calculation. Why pour resources into a system rigged against you when you can build your own fortress of comfort and control? Look at the younger guys today, the ones under 24, and you see the reprogramming failing in real time. They are pushing back against the constant indoctrination in schools and media. Polls show them holding more traditional views on marriage, family, and even skepticism towards certain progressive ideals that were sold as progress. They watched their older brothers and fathers navigate the minefield and decided early that the game was not worth playing on those terms. This is not regression in some negative sense. It is a return to fairness, to recognizing that men thrive when they are not constantly apologizing for existing or expected to fix problems they did not create. Women of the same age, by contrast, continue trending more progressive, creating an even wider gap in how the sexes view relationships in society. That gap explains a lot of the current disconnect and the growing despair on one side. The stories emerging from women in this situation paint a consistent and sobering picture. One woman at 38 talks about never having been married or had children, surrounded by cats, facing another birthday with the weight of missed opportunities. Another at 50 reflects on a life without kids and the isolation that brings during family gatherings. They describe the panic of realizing their dating pool has shrunk to men coming off divorces or those with fewer options, and the regret over prioritizing career or fun in their 20s. Social media timelines fill with copium, attempts to reframe single life as empowering when the underlying loneliness and health struggles tell a different story. Antidepressants become a crutch for half of them because the reality of aging without partnership or family support hits harder than expected. This is the wake up call they did not see coming, the one that feminism assured them would never arrive if they just stayed strong and independent. Men, on the other hand, report a different experience once they step back. The peace they find is tangible. No more walking on eggshells to avoid being labeled toxic. No more financial risks that could wipe them out in court. No more emotional labor that goes unappreciated or turned against them. They eat well, maintain their health, pursue interests that actually recharge them, and build networks of like minded guys who understand the score. It is a simple life of luxury in its own way, free from the constant stress that relationships often brought under the old rules. They see women now as potential sources of drama and liability rather than partners in a shared future. And that perspective hardens with each new story of regret or demand that men return to save the day. The collapse of society in various forms, from economic pressures to social breakdowns, does not prompt them to rush back in as rescuers. They remember how they were treated when times were good, and they choose to watch from the sidelines this time. This is not about hatred or bitterness. It is about patterns that repeated often enough to become predictable. Men give vulnerability and get it used as ammunition. They provide stability and see it taken for granted until it slips once, then the whole ledger gets called due. They try to meet shifting expectations only to find the goalposts moved again. After enough cycles, the smart move is withdrawal, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. Younger generations are learning this faster because they have access to more unfiltered information and examples than ever before. They see the data on marriage success rates, the impacts of no fault divorce, the way custody and support systems favor one side, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. Walking away becomes the rational choice, not the emotional one. Women who reach this point of realization often express it in waves of public confession. They talk about the shame of being the single one at family events, the sadness of watching others with kids while their own lives feel stalled. They admit the depression that sets in when the independence they chased leaves them isolated in middle age. Some even call out the friends who encourage the same path, recognizing too late that the sisterhood advice kept them single and unhappy. The panic grows as they search for men who are no longer interested in playing the provider role on unfair terms. Begging or shaming does not bring them back because men have tasted real autonomy and found it superior to the old dynamic. They are done being the fix for problems created by choices they warned against for years. Let us keep unpacking this so the full weight lands. The biological clock is real, and no amount of modern messaging changes that fundamental truth. Women in their prime 20s had options that narrowed dramatically by 35 or 40. Men, meanwhile, often gain value with age through stability, resources, and experience. That mismatch creates the current landscape where older women compete in a pool that favors younger ones or men who opt out entirely. It is not cruelty, it is math and human nature playing out after decades of pretending otherwise. Men who built themselves up have no incentive to pair with someone whose fertility window closed while they were told to wait or focus elsewhere. The value proposition simply does not balance. Inside the minds of men who have walked away, the process follows a clear path. First comes the grief that stays private, a heaviness carried without public display, because that is how many were raised. Then, the audit, replaying where the investments of time, emotion, and money went wrong, and realizing the game was never fair. Finally, the recalibration, where protection becomes the priority. They stop opening fully, stop overinvesting, and start valuing their own peace above all. From the outside, it looks like coldness or fear of commitment. From the inside, it is survival and clarity gained through hard lessons. Patterns like unbalanced emotional ledgers, vulnerability turned into weapons, and expectations that never quite balanced. No matter the effort, all reinforce the decision to stay single or keep things light. Millions have made this choice quietly, and the trend only accelerates as stories spread. Society at large feels the effects. Birth rates drop, communities weaken, and the promise of shared futures fades for many. Women express despair over surviving without husbands, yet the men they seek are content in their fortresses of solitude. They play games, build skills, maintain health, and live without the constant pressure that defined earlier relationships. They will not ride in to rescue a culture that betrayed their trust and labeled them problems for decades. The collapse, whatever form it takes, will be observed rather than intervened in by many. This is the hard truth that more people need to face without filters. Choices have consequences, and the ones made under the banner of unlimited independence are now revealing their full cost. The younger men seeing this early are fortunate in one sense. They avoid the deeper scars by adjusting course sooner. They reject the indoctrination that tried to reshape their natural instincts toward justice, fairness, and self respect. Brain studies even show differences in how men and women process empathy and punishment, with men wired more toward accountability and women toward broader compassion that can overlook fairness. That wiring plays out in courts, policies, and relationships, further justifying the withdrawal. When systems favor outcomes over merit or protect cheaters in the game of life, men notice and opt out. It is not phobic or backward, It is principled. Women in regret mode often cycle through phases of denial, anger, and bargaining. They post about the sadness of childlessness, the difficulty of dating in their 40s, the wish that things had gone differently. Some blame men anyway, calling for them to return despite everything. Others start admitting the feminism they supported delivered loneliness instead of liberation. The antidepressant statistic is a stark marker of how widespread this quiet suffering has become. Half a generation medicating to cope with the reality they helped create. It is a sobering wake up that no one should dismiss lightly. The peace men found in walking away contrasts sharply with that struggle, highlighting why they stay gone. Expanding on the daily reality for these men makes the choice even clearer. Mornings without arguments or unspoken resentments, evenings spent on hobbies or rest instead of emotional labor, finances directed toward personal goals rather than supporting unbalanced dynamics. Health improves because stress drops. Social circles consist of people who add value rather than drain it. Video games offer achievement without real world betrayal. Simple meals eaten in comfort. Sleep that comes easy. This is not luxury in the flashy sense, but true freedom from liabilities that once seemed normal. Women appear as sources of potential stress now, and with options limited by their own past choices, the appeal fades further. Men see no reason to re enter that arena when solitude delivers better results. The cultural push that led here deserves more examination because understanding it prevents repeating the mistakes. For 50 years, the narrative dominated that men needed fixing, that patriarchy oppressed women, that career and autonomy trumped family. Media, education, and policy reinforced it. Men were shamed for natural behaviors while women were encouraged to prioritize self over partnership. The Me Too era amplified distrust, even as false accusations and overreach showed the dangers of one sided narratives. Mansplaining and similar terms turned everyday interactions into battlegrounds. The bare question framed men as default threats. All of it accumulated until men collectively said enough. They did not need permission to walk away. They just did it, one by one, until the numbers became noticeable and undeniable. Now the panic sets in for those left facing the outcomes. Social media fills with confessions of misery, calls for men to come back, admissions that single life at 40 is not the adventure sold. Yet the responses from men remain consistent. They have peace. They are not looking back. Society can collapse under the weight of its own choices, but they will watch from safety rather than sacrifice again. This is the hard hitting conclusion that should make everyone pause. The men are done, and the women who push the hardest feel it most acutely as time runs out on their options. It is raw, it is truthful, and it is the reality we all have to live with now. Continuing this thread, the long term effects ripple outward. Communities lose cohesion when families form less often. Economies face strains from lower birth rates and aging populations without enough support. Individual happiness metrics drop for those who bet everything on the independence model. Men who opt out report higher satisfaction in surveys of personal well being, free from the risks that once defined manhood. They invest in skills, health, and experiences that matter to them. Women, facing the other side, deal with higher rates of medication, therapy, and expressed regret. The gap widens, and no amount of shaming or policy tweaking seems to close it quickly. The wake up call is here, but whether it changes future generations depends on how honestly we face it. Younger women who see this sometimes adjust, choosing earlier partnerships or questioning the dominant script. Others double down, contributing to the ongoing divide. Men continue learning from the examples around them, reinforcing their boundaries and self reliance. The storytelling here is not about villains, but about consequences. Actions taken in the name of empowerment created isolation for many. Choices to delay family led to missed windows. Labeling men as problems encouraged them to remove themselves from the equation. The result is a society fracturing along lines of regret and resolve, with men holding the firmer ground in their solitude. This pattern repeats across countless accounts. A woman at 45, a child free, wonders why life feels empty despite achievements. Another at 50, never married, describes the loneliness during holidays. Friends encourage the same paths that led to their own unhappiness, creating cycles of poor advice. The copium on timelines tries to reframe it as strength, but the underlying pain shows through. Men, aware of these stories, see no incentive to step back into roles that offer little protection or appreciation. Their fortresses provide comfort, routine, and control. Video games deliver wins without drama. Good food and sleep restore energy. Simple living feels like luxury compared to past stresses. They are not coming back to rescue, and that truth lands heavier every day. Broader societal collapse elements amplify this. Economic pressures, shifting norms, declining trust, all make traditional commitments riskier. Men who walked away avoid those amplified dangers. They watch as demands for them to return grow louder from women facing survival questions without partners. Yet, their response stays measured and firm. Peace was hard won. They will not trade it for liabilities again. This is the sobering reality that demands attention. The men are gone, the women feel the weight, and the future will be shaped by who adapts to these truths first. Let me build this out further so the depth sinks in without rushing. The empathic differences between sexes play a role too. Men prioritize justice and fairness in outcomes, feeling reward when cheaters or unfair players face consequences. Women show broader empathy that can extend compassion even to those breaking rules. This wiring influences everything from court decisions to relationship dynamics, often leaving men feeling the system tilts against accountability. When combined with cultural messages that amplified it, the push to withdraw makes complete sense. Young men, rejecting the full progressive package, are responding to that imbalance instinctively. They want fairness, not favoritism, and they build lives accordingly. Women expressing regret often tie it back to specific choices, waiting for the perfect partner that never materialized, focusing on education and career while fertility declined, believing social circles that dismissed early marriage as outdated. Now, the reality of dating in later years brings disappointment, with pools limited and expectations mismatched. The shame of single status at family events, the depression that requires medication, the panic over long term survival without support. These are not isolated cases. They represent a trend that statistics and personal stories confirm repeatedly. Men hear it and reinforce their boundaries. Why return to fix what was broken by design? The peace men describe is worth detailing more. It is waking without dread of conflict. It is pursuing fitness or skills for personal satisfaction. It is financial freedom directed inward rather than outward to unbalanced demands. It is evenings of genuine rest or enjoyable distractions like games. It is friendships based on mutual respect without emotional minefields. This lifestyle accumulates advantages over time. Health improves, savings grow, stress drops, satisfaction rises. Women once seen as essential become viewed as optional at best, stressful at worst. The shift is complete for many, and reversing it would require massive changes in behavior and policy that show no signs of happening. As more women hit this wall, the public discourse shifts toward admissions that were unthinkable before. Feminism delivered regret for a significant portion. Independence without partnership left voids that careers could not fill. The bare question and similar rhetoric damaged trust beyond repair for many men. Now the calls for men to come back ring hollow against the history. Men have found their path, and it does not include riding back to save the day. This is the authoritative truth spoken plainly. The wake up is happening, but the solutions lie in accepting reality rather than demanding rescue. Expanding on the daily lived experience for women in this position adds the human layer. Mornings starting with medication to face the day, evenings filled with scrolling that highlights what is missing, holidays bringing sharp reminders of isolation, conversations with friends who share the same struggles but offer no real way out. The biological and emotional realities of aging without family support hit in waves. Regret mixes with anger at the messages that led them here, some directed at men anyway, but the more honest ones turn inward and acknowledge the choices. Still, the men stay gone, content in their own worlds. Men continuing this way build momentum. Each success in independence inspires others. Communities of like minded guys form around shared understanding. Skills compound, peace deepens. The contrast with the despair on the other side grows starker. Society may wish for the old balance, but it cannot force men back into roles that cost them too much. The walking away is permanent for a large group, and that changes everything going forward. This is the raw, straightforward call to face it head on. No more illusions. The data, the stories, the trends all point the same direction. The cultural reprogramming that targeted young minds for so long has begun to crack under its own weight as the youngest generation of men looks at the world they inherited and decides the script does not add up. These guys born in the 2000s grew up immersed in messages that painted traditional masculinity as problematic and pushed endless progressive ideals as the path to a better society, yet they are rejecting large portions of it outright. Polling data reveals they hold more conservative stances on family structures, marriage, and even certain social issues compared to the generations right before them, while women their age continue moving further in the progressive direction. This creates a widening chasm in how the sexes see relationships and society itself. It is not rebellion for its own sake. It is a clear eyed response to watching the outcomes play out in real time around them, from broken homes to unbalanced expectations to a system that often seems rigged against straightforward fairness. Men wired toward justice and accountability notice when the rules favor empathy over consequences, and they adjust by stepping back rather than signing up for the losing side. This hardwiring shows up in brain studies where men experience reward when cheaters or those breaking fair play get punished, while women tend to feel empathy even for the ones who violated the rules. That difference influences everything from personal interactions to larger societal decisions, and it helps explain why so many men now view the current setup as unsustainable. They see preferential treatment extended in ways that ignore merit or effort, and instead of fighting endlessly within it, they choose to build outside it. The result is a quiet but massive shift where younger men prioritize self reliance, stability, and personal standards over chasing validation in a game stacked against them. They watch as the narratives that dominated education and media for decades fail to deliver the promised harmony, and they opt for paths that actually serve their long term well being. This is the reprogramming failing in plain sight, and it signals deeper changes ahead, because when enough men disconnect, the entire structure feels the absence. Women reaching their 40s and beyond often confront a different set of realizations that hit with accumulating force over time. More than half of them over 40 rely on antidepressants to navigate daily life, revealing a level of underlying distress that no amount of professional achievement or social affirmation seems to resolve fully. They describe the weight of holidays spent as the only single person at family gatherings, the quiet shame that surfaces when surrounded by siblings with children and stable partnerships. Many admit they delayed family formation, chasing careers, or waiting for ideal circumstances that never aligned perfectly, and now face the reality of narrowed options and dating pools filled mostly with men recovering from their own past relationships. The stories pile up across personal accounts and social media, where the tone shifts from empowerment to a raw admission of isolation and uncertainty about long term survival without the support structures they once took for granted or dismissed as outdated. The biological realities compound this because fertility windows close regardless of modern messaging, and men who invested decades building resources and stability naturally gravitate toward partners still in prime years for family building. A man in his 30s or 40s who has his life together looks at the value exchange and sees little incentive to commit resources to someone past that window when younger options exist or when solitude delivers consistent peace. This is not cruelty. It is the straightforward math of incentives and timing that society spent years pretending did not matter. Women who spent their 20s and early 30s prioritizing independence or fun now encounter the downstream effects where their past choices limit future ones, and the regret surfaces in waves of public reflection that highlight missed opportunities for marriage and children. The independence sold as liberation left many with impressive resumes but empty homes, and that contrast becomes harder to ignore with each passing year. Men who have walked away describe their lives in terms of regained control and reduced stress that accumulates into genuine satisfaction. They wake up without the low level anxiety of navigating shifting emotional expectations or potential conflicts that drain energy. Their finances stay directed toward personal goals, health improvements, or simple enjoyments rather than supporting dynamics that often felt one sided. Evenings involve hobbies that recharge them, video games that provide clear achievement without real world betrayal, or quiet routines that restore balance. Sleep comes easier when the mind is not occupied with unspoken resentments or the need to manage someone else's moods constantly. This is not escapism. It is a deliberate choice for environments where effort produces predictable returns and vulnerability does not become ammunition later. Over time, these habits build momentum. Health improves, savings grow, social circles consist of people who add value, and the overall quality of life rises in ways that make returning to old patterns unappealing. The patterns that drove this withdrawal deserve close examination because they repeat with enough consistency to shape behavior across millions. Emotional ledgers rarely balance where a man's contributions get accepted as baseline, while any shortfall gets logged permanently and retrieved during disagreements. Vulnerability shared in moments of closeness often returns twisted into weapons during arguments, targeting the exact insecurities once confided. Expectations evolve constantly so that meeting one set leads to new ones without acknowledgement of progress made. Men who experience this cycle multiple times run an internal audit that reveals the game was never designed for mutual fairness on the terms they were taught. Instead of continuing to play, they recalibrate toward protection, lowering investment, and raising standards for any future involvement. From the outside, it can look like withdrawal or coldness, but inside, it represents wisdom earned through repeated lessons that no amount of effort could override the underlying imbalances. Society feels these shifts in declining birth rates, weakening community ties, and growing gaps in how men and women experience fulfillment. Women express increasing panic over navigating life without husbands as economic and social pressures mount, yet the men they call upon have already found better alternatives in their own independence. Those men watch the broader collapse, whether economic strains or cultural breakdowns, from positions of relative safety rather than rushing in as unpaid rescuers for a system that previously labeled them the root problem. This decision stems from memory of how trust was handled when times were stable and from a clear assessment that the risks outweigh the rewards under current conditions. The fortresses they build, whether literal through home ownership or metaphorical through routines, provide comfort that unbalanced relationships rarely matched. Younger women sometimes see these trends and make adjustments toward earlier commitments or questioning dominant cultural advice, but many continue forward, creating further divergence. The stories from women in regret phase often circle back to specific turning points, waiting for perfect timing that never arrived, focusing on education and career, while social circles reinforced delaying family and believing the pool of good men would remain available indefinitely. Now, dating in later decades brings repeated disappointments with mismatched expectations and limited compatible partners who meet their evolved standards. The shame of single status at family events mixes with practical concerns about aging without built in support networks, and the medication reliance becomes a daily marker of how heavy the load feels. These admissions spread across platforms, yet they rarely prompt the systemic changes needed because the men have already adapted by removing themselves from the equation. The daily texture of life for men in this mode reinforces their choice through small, consistent wins. Mornings start with clarity and purpose directed inward toward fitness skill building or personal projects that yield tangible progress. Work or business efforts compound without the distraction of managing relational drama or financial drains from unbalanced setups. Afternoons or evenings offer genuine rest or engaging distractions where achievement feels earned and drama absent. Friendships thrive on mutual respect and shared interests without the emotional labor demands that once dominated interactions with partners. Finances grow through disciplined choices, unburdened by supporting lifestyles that do not reciprocate proportionally. Health metrics improve as stress drops and routines stabilize, allowing energy for long term goals rather than short term conflict resolution. This lifestyle does not require constant external validation because the internal metrics of control and peace provide sufficient reward. Broader societal elements amplify the appeal of walking away. Economic uncertainties make long term commitments riskier, especially in systems where outcomes favor one side in disputes. Declining social trust means fewer organic ways to build genuine connections without heavy filtering for red flags. Cultural messages continue pushing narratives that clash with observed realities, leaving many men skeptical of official guidance on relationships. When combined with personal histories of unbalanced ledgers and weaponized vulnerability, the rational response becomes disengagement on a large scale. Men invest in themselves through education, trades, businesses, or simple stability, knowing those assets remain theirs regardless of future changes. They form networks of like minded individuals who understand the landscape without needing explanation. And those connections provide camaraderie without the complications of romantic entanglement. Women confronting these realities often move through phases of reflection that mix acknowledgement with resistance. Some recognize the role their generation's choices played in reshaping incentives and outcomes, admitting that independence without partnership created voids careers alone could not fill. Others direct frustration outward, calling for men to return, despite the history, or blaming systemic factors, rather than examining timing and priorities. The honest conversations happening in private or on platforms reveal deep loneliness during milestones, the sadness of watching peers build families while their own lives feel paused, and the practical fears of facing health or financial challenges without a committed partner. Antidepressant use serves as a blunt indicator of how widespread this quiet suffering runs, affecting daily functioning for a huge portion of women over 40. The contrast with men reporting higher satisfaction in solitude highlights how differently the same cultural shifts landed for each sex. This divergence traces back to foundational differences in priorities and wiring. Men oriented toward justice seek balanced exchanges where effort and accountability produce reliable results. When systems or relationships fail, that test repeatedly, withdrawal protects against further loss. Women often show broader empathy that can extend understanding even to unbalanced situations. But that same trait sometimes delays recognition of personal costs until later. The cultural emphasis on female independence amplified one side while downplaying the complementary strengths men bring to stable partnerships. The outcome is a landscape where men find peace in self directed lives, and women face the accumulated weight of choices made under different assumptions. Understanding this without blame allows clearer navigation forward, though it requires facing uncomfortable truths about timing, biology, and incentives. The momentum behind men staying single long term builds from accumulated experience rather than sudden decisions. Each repeated pattern of emotional imbalance or shifting rules adds weight to the choice for independence. Over years, the benefits compound in ways that make reentry feel like stepping back into a known risk without sufficient upside. Men describe the freedom of directing their energy toward pursuits that align with their values, whether creative, physical, intellectual, or simply restorative. They avoid the audit phase after every disagreement because there are fewer high stakes emotional investments to review. Peace becomes the default state rather than something fought for within constant negotiation. This shift is not temporary for many. It represents a fundamental recalibration that younger generations absorb through observation and shared information, making the trend self reinforcing. As more accounts surface, the public discourse slowly incorporates these realities, even if mainstream outlets lag behind. Women in their 40s and 50s post about the unexpected loneliness of child free or never married life, the challenges of dating when most compatible men have paired earlier or opted out entirely, and the regret over heeding advice that prioritized everything except family formation. Social timelines fill with attempts to reframe single life as empowering, but the underlying tone often reveals the struggle beneath. Men observing this see confirmation of their choices rather than motivation to reverse them because the patterns that cause the regret remain unaddressed. The fortress of solitude offers protection from becoming the solution to problems created by decades of cultural direction that discouraged mutual investment. Economic and demographic ripples extend outward from these personal decisions. Lower marriage and birth rates strain future support systems for aging populations. Communities lose the stabilizing influence of intact families that once provided mutual aid and shared purpose. Individual metrics of happiness diverge with men in self directed lives, often reporting steadier well being, while women in isolation modes show higher reliance on medical interventions for mood and coping. These trends are not abstract. They manifest in daily lives through choices about housing, career focus, and social investment. Men channeling resources inward build resilience that benefits them regardless of larger societal directions. Women facing gaps in support networks confront harder practical realities as time progresses without the buffer of partnership. The storytelling around these shifts reveals human patterns rather than villains. Choices made in good faith under prevailing messages led to outcomes that surprised many. Delaying family for career or personal exploration seemed reasonable when fertility and options appeared unlimited, but biology and incentives operate on their own timeline. Men responding with self protection followed logical assessments of risk and reward after repeated experiences. The gap between expectation and reality creates the current tension where calls for rescue meet firm boundaries built from hard lessons. Facing this squarely without filters offers the best path for those still forming their futures. Recognize timing, understand incentives, build self reliance, and choose paths aligned with observable results rather than promised ideals that fail delivery. Expanding further, the internal process men undergo after enough cycles deserves detail because it explains the depth of the disengagement. The initial grief stays private, carried as heaviness during normal activities without outward drama. The audit follows with focused replay of investments versus returns, identifying where fairness broke down. Recalibration then sets new defaults, lower openness, measured effort, higher personal standards. This progression feels strategic rather than emotional, protecting core well being after evidence showed full investment carried disproportionate downside. Patterns like unbalanced accounting, vulnerability traps, and moving goalposts repeat across enough experiences to become predictable, leading to the same protective response. Millions reaching this point quietly shifts the overall dynamic, making broad reversal unlikely without major changes in behavior and, and expectations. Women in the regret phase describe specific textures of daily life that underscore the weight. Mornings may start with medication to blunt the edge of persistent low mood. Work provides structure, but lacks the deeper purpose family once promised. Evenings involve reflection or distraction that highlights absences during holidays or milestones. Conversations with peers often circle similar struggles without clear solutions, creating shared copium rather than actionable change. The biological clock realization hits differently when options narrow and compatible partners prove scarce. Shame surfaces at family events where single status stands out against peers with children. Practical fears about aging health and finances without built in support add layers to the emotional load. These experiences spread through personal accounts, reinforcing the trend, while men continue prioritizing their established peace. The appeal of simple living for men lies in its sustainability and lack of drama. Routines centered on health, good food quality rest, and engaging activities deliver compounding returns. Video games or hobbies provide flow states and achievement without interpersonal risk. Finances directed solely towards self improvement or enjoyment remove resentment from supporting unbalanced lifestyles. Social interactions stay light and reciprocal, avoiding emotional labor imbalances. This setup allows recovery from past stresses and preparation for whatever comes next without dependency on external validation. Men who adopt it report clearer minds, better physical condition, and genuine contentment that contrast sharply with the distress signals coming from the other side. The choice to maintain it hardens as stories of regret fail to offer new evidence of changed conditions. Cultural forces that shape the situation warrant ongoing scrutiny because lessons prevent repetition. Decades of messaging emphasize female independence while framing male traits as suspect or optional. Education and media amplified certain narratives, downplaying complementary roles or biological realities. Movements increased distrust through broad generalizations that painted men as default problems. The cumulative effect encouraged women to delay or dismiss traditional paths while men adapted by lowering engagement. Now the outcomes reveal the costs in loneliness metrics, health data, and demographic shifts. Honest examination acknowledges where assumptions failed without assigning blanket blame. Men found viable alternatives in self focus. Women face the results of timing and priority choices. The future belongs to those adapting to evidence rather than clinging to failed promises. This reality calls for straightforward acceptance. Men have located peace in independence and show no collective rush to abandon it. Women confronting regret highlight the human cost of cultural directions that ignored trade offs. The divide persists because incentives remain misaligned and trust eroded over time. For individuals, the path forward involves clear assessment of personal values, risks, and realistic outcomes. Build stability, invest in health, prioritize fairness in interactions, and recognize that choices carry long consequences. The bar conversation continues through shared observation, but the core truths stay consistent. Men walked away, found value in their own lives, and constructed realities that serve them. That stands as the sobering foundation everyone must navigate now. The legal frameworks surrounding family and relationships have tilted in ways that many men now view as fundamentally unbalanced, adding another layer to the decision for permanent withdrawal. Courts often default toward certain outcomes in custody support and asset division that leave men carrying disproportionate financial burdens long after emotional ties have dissolved. Stories circulate of men losing homes, savings, and future earnings to arrangements that seem to punish provider roles while offering little protection against false claims or shifting narratives during proceedings. This environment turns what should be a mutual commitment into a high stakes gamble where one side holds most of the cards. Men who observe friends or colleagues navigate these systems emerge with hardened boundaries, choosing instead to safeguard their resources and freedom rather than risk everything on a roll of dice loaded against fairness. The result is not bitterness alone, but a calculated avoidance of structures that demand full investment while delivering uncertain or punitive returns. Younger men absorb these lessons early through open discussions and shared information steering clear before they ever sign the papers or build the joint life that could later be dismantled at great personal cost. Education systems have played a significant role in shaping the divide by embedding certain narratives from early ages onward. Curriculums increasingly emphasized critiques of traditional structures while presenting independence and self fulfillment as unquestioned goods for one sex over balanced partnership. Boys encountered environments where natural energy and competitiveness were managed as problems rather than channeled into strengths, leading many to disengage from formal paths or question the value of striving within systems that seem to undervalue their contributions. Girls received reinforcement for ambitious career focus with less emphasis on the trade offs of timing and family formation. The long term outcome appears in the mismatched expectations that surface later when real world incentives clash with taught ideals. Men who emerged from these settings often carry skepticism toward official guidance on relationships, preferring direct observation and personal results. This skepticism accelerates their shift toward self directed lives, where they control the variables rather than trusting institutions or cultural scripts that have demonstrated repeated blind spots. Media portrayals have amplified the disconnect by consistently framing men through lenses of suspicion or obsolescence while celebrating female autonomy without highlighting potential downsides. Television shows, films, and online content frequently depict male characters as bumbling or threatening until corrected by female leads, reinforcing a cultural undercurrent that men require fixing or are optional. At the same time, stories of successful single women dominate without equal airtime for the realities of isolation or health struggles that follow for many. Men consuming this content recognize the pattern and respond by tuning out or seeking alternative sources that align more closely with their experiences. The cumulative effect erodes trust in mainstream messaging, pushing them further into personal networks and self reliance. Women influenced by the same portrayals may internalize the idea that partnership represents compromise rather than mutual elevation, leading to delays that compound over decades. The storytelling in media thus contributes to the real world divergence, where one side finds validation in independence and the other discovers its hidden cost through lived experience. Health outcomes further illuminate the different paths emerging from these cultural shifts. Men who prioritize simple routines report improvements in physical metrics as stress decreases and focus turns inward toward consistent exercise, nutrition, and rest. Blood pressure stabilizes, energy levels rise, and mental clarity sharpens without the constant background noise of relational negotiation. They avoid the cycles of emotional drain that often accompany unbalanced dynamics, allowing recovery and growth in areas once neglected. Women facing prolonged singlehood in later years show elevated reliance on pharmaceutical support for mood regulation, with statistics indicating widespread use that points to deeper unmet needs for connection and purpose. The body and mind respond to prolonged isolation in ways that no career milestone fully offsets, creating a sobering contrast in how each sex experiences the long term results of delayed or foregone partnership. These differences are not moral judgments, but observable patterns rooted in human design and the choices made within modern environments. Future scenarios begin to crystallize when projecting these trends forward without illusion. Demographic projections indicate shrinking younger cohorts as birth rates remain low, straining everything from labor markets to social safety nets designed for larger, more family oriented populations. Communities may fragment further as fewer stable households form the backbone of local support and shared values. Economic pressures could intensify for individuals without the dual income or mutual aid that partnerships historically provided, particularly for those who bet heavily on solo trajectories. Men positioned in their fortresses of self reliance stand better equipped to weather such shifts, having already built resilience through disciplined habits and resource control. Women confronting gaps in support may face harder adjustments as time removes flexibility and options narrow. This is not prediction of doom, but a straightforward extension of current incentives where walking away creates self contained stability while continued pursuit of mismatched ideals leaves vulnerabilities exposed. The impact on younger generations deserves careful consideration because they inherit both the lessons and the consequences. Boys growing up amid these shifts often witness fathers or uncles modeling independence and learn early to guard their efforts against potential exploitation. They develop skepticism toward romantic narratives that promise fulfillment through full emotional openness, preferring instead measured approaches that protect core well being. Girls observe the regret expressed by older women in their circles, absorbing mixed messages about timing and priorities that can create internal conflict later. The gap in perspectives widens as each sex processes the same cultural inheritance through different lenses, leading to further challenges in forming connections. Those who navigate it successfully tend to prioritize clear communication about expectations and boundaries from the outset rather than assuming shared assumptions will hold. The sobering element lies in recognizing that without deliberate course corrections, the patterns may solidify into new norms where large portions of the population remain disconnected by default. Work, and career landscapes transform under these realities as well. Men channeling energy into professional growth without relational distractions often achieve steadier advancement or entrepreneurial success because their focus remains undivided. Resources accumulate without diversion into setups that demand constant balancing acts. Women who delayed family for career peaks may reach impressive heights, yet face the question of whether the trade off delivered proportional satisfaction when personal life remains unfulfilled. The workplace itself feels the absence of men fully invested in traditional provider roles, shifting dynamics around ambition and collaboration. Some environments adapt by emphasizing individual output over long term loyalty, while others struggle with retention as people prioritize personal peace over corporate demands. The overall picture shows men thriving in self directed professional paths and women grappling with the full ledger of choices that once seemed to offer unlimited upside. Social connections evolve in response to the broader withdrawal, with men forming tighter circles based on shared understanding and mutual respect. These groups provide camaraderie without the intensity or risk of romantic involvement, allowing honest discussions about life strategies and observations. Activities center on common interests from fitness to intellectual pursuits, creating spaces where value is added rather than drained. Women in similar age brackets may find their networks focused more on processing shared struggles, which can reinforce rather than resolve underlying isolation. The contrast highlights how human needs for belonging manifest differently when partnership defaults diminish. Men satisfy much of that need through low maintenance friendships and personal mastery, while many women report persistent voids that social or professional circles only partially address. This divergence underscores the complementary nature of traditional arrangements, even as society experiments with alternatives. Technological changes accelerate the ability to maintain satisfying lives without traditional partnership. Access to information entertainment and virtual communities allows men to curate experiences that align with their preferences, reducing the necessity of seeking fulfillment through relationships that carry high risk. Gaming platforms offer achievement and social elements in controlled environments where rules are clear and outcomes depend on skill rather than shifting emotional landscapes. Delivery services and home based setups enable comfortable routines that once required more external coordination. These tools empower self sufficiency in ways previous generations could not access, making the fortress of solitude more appealing and sustainable. At the same time, they can delay real world connections for those not deliberate about balance, though men who have walked away tend to use them as enhancements rather than total substitutes. The net effect strengthens the trend toward independence by lowering the barriers to a high quality single life. Philosophical underpinnings of the shift trace to fundamental questions about fairness and human nature that cultural messaging attempted to override. Men oriented toward justice seek arrangements where contributions match rewards and accountability applies evenly. When repeated experiences show imbalance, they recalibrate toward systems they control directly. This response aligns with deeper wiring that rewards fair play and punishes exploitation rather than extending endless empathy to violators. Women often navigate with broader compassion, which serves well in nurturing contexts, but can delay recognition of personal costs in self focused environments. The tension between these approaches created the current landscape where one side protects boundaries and the other confronts outcomes of expanded autonomy. Acknowledging these differences without assigning superiority allows clearer navigation rather than forcing conformity to one model. The raw truth is that human diversity in priorities produces varied results when incentives change dramatically. Potential paths forward for society involve honest reckoning with the data rather than continued denial. Encouraging earlier family formation through cultural adjustments could mitigate some regret patterns by aligning choices with biological and emotional realities. Rebalancing legal frameworks toward neutrality might restore trust for men considering commitment by reducing perceived risks. Education that presents trade offs transparently rather than idealized narratives would equip younger generations with better decision tools. None of these changes guarantee reversal of the walking away trend because many men have tasted genuine peace and found it superior under current conditions. Yet they could narrow the gap for those still open to partnership by addressing root imbalances. The sobering call remains that individuals bear responsibility for their choices within the environment, while collective awareness influences how that environment evolves. Daily decision making for men in this mode centers on preservation and growth within controllable spheres. They allocate time toward habits that compound, positively avoiding drains that previously dominated their energy. Nutrition becomes intentional exercise consistent and rest prioritized because these elements deliver reliable returns without external dependency. Financial planning focuses on building buffers and assets that remain secure regardless of relational status. Social investments go toward relationships that add rather than subtract, creating networks resilient to individual changes. This disciplined approach yields increasing freedom as capabilities expand and vulnerabilities decrease. The lifestyle feels raw in its honesty because it discards illusions of effortless harmony in favor of earned stability. Women observing from their positions sometimes express envy at the apparent simplicity, though replicating it requires similar boundary setting that cultural messages often discouraged. The emotional landscape for those in regret phases reveals layers beyond surface admissions. There is the quiet grief for paths not taken, the recognition of advice followed that led to unexpected isolation, and the practical navigation of aging without built in companionship. Milestones pass with sharper contrast against peers whose lives follow different priorities. Future planning involves contingencies for health and support that partnerships once simplified. These elements accumulate into a weight that medication may blunt but not erase entirely. Men who have moved past similar grief into acceptance describe a liberation that comes from aligning actions with evidence rather than hope. Their peace stems from resolved internal audits where lessons integrated and new defaults established. The divide persists because one side processes toward protection and the other toward reconciliation with outcomes that feel irreversible. Broader cultural introspection could benefit from examining where empowerment narratives overlooked natural constraints. Fertility timing, partnership value, and the human need for mutual reliance represent realities that no slogan fully negates. Men adapted by minimizing exposure to unbalanced risks, while women encounter the full spectrum of consequences from those same adaptations. The storytelling here is one of cause and effect rather than assigned fault. Choices interacted with biology, incentives, and wiring to produce the current state. Future generations may course correct by integrating these lessons into personal strategies, emphasizing self knowledge, clear standards, and realistic timelines. The authoritative takeaway is that peace exists on both sides when expectations match actions, but forcing mismatched roles only deepens the fracture. Economic independence becomes a cornerstone for men who have walked away, allowing them to weather uncertainties without reliance on dual structures. They build careers or side ventures that align with personal strengths, directing profits towards security and enjoyment. This autonomy reduces vulnerability to relational disruptions that could otherwise derail progress. Saving strategies focus on long term resilience through diversified assets and minimal lifestyle creep. The approach mirrors their overall philosophy of control and foresight applied to material matters. Women in parallel situations may achieve similar professional success, yet face different calculations when considering solo aging or support needs. The landscape rewards those who planned with foresight while highlighting gaps for those who did not. This reality adds weight to the wake up call, urging deliberate assessment of trade offs at every stage. Interpersonal dynamics shift as men apply harder filters to any potential involvement. Interactions begin with clear boundaries and observable consistency rather than initial openness that proved costly before. Trust earns over time through actions rather than words, avoiding the vulnerability traps of earlier approaches. This methodical style can appear distant initially, but protects against repeated patterns of imbalance. Women seeking reconnection encountered these filters as barriers built from collective experience, making reentry challenging without demonstrated change. The process underscores how past behaviors shape future accessibility. Men content in their current state rarely initiate pursuit, preferring to observe whether conditions have truly shifted. The raw dynamic is one of earned access rather than assumed availability, reflecting the depth of prior disillusionment. Demographic realities will continue influencing policy and culture as the effects compound. Aging populations with fewer caregivers strain existing systems, prompting discussions about incentives for family formation. Immigration or technological solutions may offset some shortages, but cannot replace the stabilizing role of committed partnerships at scale. Men positioned securely may engage selectively in these conversations from strength rather than desperation. Women voicing concerns highlight practical needs that once partnerships fulfilled organically. The tension drives potential innovation in social structures, though success depends on addressing root causes of disengagement. Honest dialogue without shaming represents the most productive route, though history shows resistance to uncomfortable adjustments. Personal mastery pursuits occupy much of the energy men redirect from relational investment. They tackle fitness goals, skill acquisition, or creative projects with sustained focus, yielding satisfaction through visible progress. These endeavors build identity, independent of external validation, reinforcing the value of self directed life. Hobbies evolve from casual distractions to sources of deep engagement, providing flow and accomplishment without interpersonal complications. The overall effect is a richer internal world where peace stems from competence and control. This contrasts with external seeking that previously left many vulnerable to shifting circumstances. The approach aligns with a straightforward philosophy that true security begins within and radiates outward through disciplined action. The sobering foundation rests on acceptance of divergent paths forged by decades of cultural experimentation. Men have located sustainable peace through withdrawal and self focus. Women confront the accumulated results of delayed or foregone traditional routes. Society navigates the space between with varying degrees of awareness. Individuals who internalize the patterns position themselves advantageously by aligning choices with evidence rather than prevailing narratives. The conversation at the bar level continues through shared observation and honest exchange, but the core truths remain unchanged. Men are not returning en masse because their current reality delivers what previous arrangements often did not. That stands as the clear eyed reality shaping decisions for those paying attention now and into the future. The psychological adjustments men make after repeated cycles of unbalanced investment create a permanent shift in how they approach any form of connection moving forward. They develop an internal radar for early indicators of emotional ledger imbalances where contributions are expected as default, but shortfalls trigger disproportionate backlash. This awareness leads to deliberate pacing in interactions, starting with observation rather than immediate vulnerability, allowing patterns to reveal themselves before significant resources, emotional or otherwise, get committed. The process feels like upgrading from naive trust to earned verification, which many describe as liberating once the initial discomfort of lowered openness passes. Men report clearer decision making because the mental energy previously spent managing potential conflicts redirects toward personal projects, health optimization, and long term planning. This recalibrated mindset spreads through informal networks where guys share observations without drama, creating collective intelligence that accelerates the trend for those coming up behind them. The raw truth here is that protection of self becomes the baseline not out of fear, but out of fidelity to evidence accumulated over years of trying the alternative path. Historical parallels offer context for why this current wave of withdrawal feels both unprecedented and inevitable when viewed through broader timelines. Societies throughout history experienced periods where traditional roles eroded under economic or ideological pressures, leading to demographic declines and social fragmentation until new equilibria formed. The difference now lies in the scale of information flow that allows men to recognize the patterns faster and coordinate their response through quiet individual choices rather than organized movements. Past civilizations saw men disengage from unstable structures by focusing on personal domains or frontier opportunities, and the modern equivalent appears in digital spaces, home based economies, and self contained lifestyles. Women in those earlier eras who delayed family often faced similar regret phases when support networks weakened, though without the pharmaceutical buffers or career alternatives available today. Understanding these cycles without romanticizing the past helps frame the present as another chapter where incentives realigned and human behavior followed logically. Men today are not inventing the response, they are repeating an adaptive strategy refined by countless generations facing comparable imbalances. Economic autonomy stands as a foundational pillar for the sustained peace men describe once they step away from high risk relational models. They prioritize skill development in trades, businesses, or flexible careers that generate reliable income without requiring constant external validation or dual income dependencies that introduce new vulnerabilities. Savings rates climb as expenditures focus inward on quality tools, equipment, experiences, and health rather than subsidizing lifestyles that demand reciprocity without consistent delivery. Investment strategies emphasize control and diversification, avoiding assets that could be divided or contested in adversarial proceedings. This approach builds buffers against broader uncertainties like job market shifts or inflationary pressures, allowing men to weather storms from positions of strength rather than desperation. The lifestyle compounds advantages over time as reduced stress supports better cognitive function and decision quality, creating a virtuous cycle that reinforces the choice for independence. Women facing solo economics encounter different calculations where career peaks may coincide with heightened personal support needs that lack the natural partnership buffer once assumed available. Technological integration into daily routines further solidifies the appeal of self directed living by removing friction from basic needs and entertainment. Men curate environments where groceries arrive without leaving home. Fitness happens on personal schedules, and intellectual stimulation flows through chosen sources rather than mandated social obligations. Virtual spaces provide achievement and community on terms that avoid the emotional taxation of mismatched expectations, allowing flow states in gaming, creative tools, or learning platforms that deliver satisfaction without betrayal risk. This seamless blending of physical and digital creates a fortress that feels abundant rather than deprived, contrasting sharply with narratives that once portrayed single life as incomplete. The tools evolve constantly, empowering greater customization so that routines align precisely with individual energy patterns and preferences. For those who have walked away, this represents practical liberation, where technology serves autonomy instead of amplifying dependencies that proved costly before. The role of mentorship and elder guidance has transformed in this environment as younger men seek wisdom from those who navigated the shifts successfully rather than from institutional voices that lag behind realities. Informal exchanges, whether through online forums, in person meetups, or shared activities, transmit practical strategies for boundary setting, financial protection, and life design that prioritize long term resilience. Older men who found peace share the audits they performed, the patterns they identified, and the adjustments that delivered results, creating templates that save the next wave years of trial and error. This transmission feels raw and authoritative because it stems from lived consequences rather than theoretical ideals. Women observing parallel networks sometimes express frustration at the opacity, yet the content remains straightforward self protection based on evidence. The gap in guidance sources contributes to divergent outcomes where one side builds deliberate architectures for stability and the other grapples with unaddressed voids. Spiritual or philosophical explorations often deepen for men in solitude, providing frameworks that affirm the value of inner order over external chaos. Practices ranging from Stoic principles to mindfulness or simple reflection help integrate past experiences into coherent narratives that reduce lingering resentment and sharpen focus on controllable elements. This internal work yields a centered presence that radiates into daily decisions, making interactions more measured and purposeful. Many describe discovering meaning through mastery of self discipline, contribution to chosen communities, or appreciation of natural rhythms that partnerships once disrupted. The process is not escapist but integrative, turning withdrawal into positive construction, where peace emerges from alignment rather than avoidance. Women in regret phases sometimes turn toward similar explorations, yet report greater difficulty reconciling cultural messaging with biological and emotional realities, creating additional layers of internal tension. The contrast highlights how different wiring and experiences lead to varied paths toward resolution or acceptance. Community structures at the local level feel the absence of men fully invested in traditional provider protector roles, prompting organic adaptations among those who remain. Neighborhoods and voluntary associations see shifts toward individual responsibility, with men contributing through selective involvement that protects their boundaries while still adding value where it aligns with personal standards. This selective engagement avoids burnout from unbalanced expectations, fostering sustainability over heroic sacrifice. Women managing households or careers solo encounter practical challenges in areas once handled through complementary strengths, leading to increased reliance on paid services or extended networks that prove less reliable. The overall fabric changes as large numbers opt out of full participation, creating both voids and opportunities for new models based on mutual clarity rather than assumed roles. The sobering element involves recognizing that restoration requires addressing the incentives that drove disengagement in the first place rather than demanding return without change. Creative expression flourishes for many men. Once relational energy redirects inward, allowing pursuits that were sidelined by management of external dynamics. Writing, music, building, physical projects, or digital creation become outlets for processing and manifesting competence in visible forms that provide intrinsic reward. These activities build identity layers independent of romantic validation, reinforcing the self contained nature of their chosen path. Flow states achieved through deep work contrast with the fragmented attention that unbalanced relationships often demanded, creating richer personal narratives over time. Sharing select outputs within trusted circles generates feedback loops that enhance skill without exposing core vulnerabilities. The raw satisfaction comes from tangible progress and mastery rather than performative elements that once competed for time and focus. This redirection contributes to the reported sense of luxury in simple living, where depth replaces breadth in daily experience. Global perspectives reveal similar trends emerging across cultures as economic development and ideological shifts interact with universal human patterns. In various regions, men respond to changing family laws, media influences, and opportunity structures by prioritizing personal stability over high risk commitments, leading to parallel declines in marriage and birth rates. The information age accelerates recognition of these patterns, allowing cross cultural learning where strategies for self protection spread rapidly. Women in those contexts voice comparable regrets around delayed family and isolation, though expressions vary by local norms. The universality underscores that the phenomenon transcends single societies emerging wherever incentives misalign with evolved psychology and biology. Understanding this broader scope frames the local experience as part of a larger human adjustment rather than isolated failure, creating space for adaptive responses at individual and collective levels. Longevity and health span considerations influence decision making as men project their fortresses into later decades. By maintaining lower stress, consistent routines, and financial buffers, they position themselves for extended periods of capability and enjoyment without dependency on external caregivers or strained family systems. Nutrition, exercise, and recovery practices compound into resilience that contrasts with higher medication reliance observed in other demographics. This forward thinking adds depth to the piece they describe because it rests on sustainable foundations rather than short term relief. Planning for potential solitude in advanced age motivates disciplined habits today, turning the choice into comprehensive life architecture. The authoritative view here is that proactive design outperforms reactive hope when facing demographic realities that point toward reduced traditional support structures. Intergenerational transmission of values adapts as fathers or mentors emphasize self reliance, critical thinking, and boundary awareness over unconditional trust in systems or narratives. Young men receive guidance rooted in observable outcomes, helping them avoid common pitfalls through earlier course corrections. This transfer feels straightforward and protective, focusing on evidence based strategies rather than idealized expectations. Daughters in these families may encounter mixed messages as cultural forces pull in different directions, creating opportunities for honest dialogue about trade offs. The process contributes to gradual evolution where each generation refines its approach based on inherited lessons. The sobering reality remains that large scale reversal of walking away requires systemic shifts in fairness and incentives that have yet to materialize, prompting continued individual adaptation. Environmental mastery extends to living spaces where men optimize homes for comfort, efficiency, and personal expression, turning residences into true sanctuaries. Minimalist or purpose driven designs reduce maintenance burdens, allowing more energy for meaningful activities. Technology integration supports seamless routines from automated systems to personalized entertainment, creating environments that recharge rather than drain. This attention to physical surroundings reinforces the internal peace by aligning outer conditions with inner states. The luxury feels earned through deliberate choice rather than inherited circumstance, highlighting the value of directing resources inward. Women managing solo households often describe different priorities and challenges where space serves multiple demanding roles without the complementary division once common. The philosophical acceptance of impermanence and personal responsibility deepens for those who have walked away, fostering resilience against external pressures or calls for rescue. Recognizing that choices carry irreversible consequences encourages presence in the current reality rather than endless negotiation with the past. This mindset liberates energy for constructive action within chosen domains, producing satisfaction through alignment with truth over illusion. Men describe a grounded authority that comes from integrating hard lessons without lingering attachment to what could have been. The raw edge lies in its honesty because it discards comforting narratives in favor of functional ones that deliver results. This acceptance spreads quietly, influencing how younger cohorts frame their own paths forward. Cultural artifacts like literature, music, and art produced in these contexts capture the shift toward introspection and self mastery, reflecting themes of resilience, boundary, and earned peace. These works resonate within the communities that create them, providing mirrors for shared experience without mainstream validation. The output stands apart from dominant messaging by emphasizing agency amid complexity rather than victimhood or utopian promises. Consumption of such material reinforces the internal frameworks men build, sustaining motivation through cultural echo chambers that affirm their observations. The dynamic illustrates how subcultures form organically around lived realities, filling voids left by broader institutions. Over time, these expressions may influence wider discourse as the scale of disengagement becomes impossible to ignore. Policy implications emerge as demographic data influences debates around family incentives, legal reform, and social support structures. Proposals for neutral courts, earlier education on trade offs, or economic adjustments aim to restore balance, though implementation faces resistance from entrenched interests. Men observing from positions of independence evaluate such efforts through the lens of past performance, demanding evidence of genuine change before re engagement. Women advocating for support highlight practical needs created by the same shifts, adding urgency to the conversations. The tension drives incremental adjustments, though the core trend of walking away persists until incentives realign substantially. The straightforward assessment is that sustainable participation requires fairness that matches rhetoric with outcomes rather than continued one sided demands. Personal legacy building takes unique forms as men channel resources into projects, mentorship, or assets that outlast individual lifespans without relying on direct descendants. Businesses, creative works, or community contributions become vehicles for impact that remain under personal control. This approach satisfies generative impulses through chosen channels rather than traditional family structures that carry higher risk under current conditions. The satisfaction derives from visible, enduring results that align with values of competence and autonomy. The process feels authoritative because it stems from deliberate design rather than default paths. Women confronting legacy questions in solo contexts describe different emotional textures, often involving reflection on paths not taken and alternative fulfillment strategies that prove more challenging to implement later. The cumulative weight of these interconnected elements paints a future where self contained lives become normalized for large portions of the male population. Peace achieved through disciplined withdrawal and internal focus stands resilient against external appeals or societal pressures. The sobering wake up for everyone involved lies in recognizing that human behavior follows incentives, biology, and evidence more reliably than ideological promises. Men who have built their fortresses demonstrate the viability of alternative paths, inspiring continued adaptation. As the conversation unfolds through personal choices and shared observation, the raw truth persists. The men are not looking back because what they found forward delivers what previous arrangements often failed to provide consistently. That reality shapes the landscape now and for the foreseeable horizon, requiring clear eyed navigation from all who encounter it. The neurological adaptations that solidify after years of deliberate disengagement rewire how men process potential partnerships, turning what once felt like an essential drive into a carefully evaluated option weighed against proven personal stability. Brain imaging and behavioral patterns suggest that consistent low stress environments strengthen pathways associated with independent reward processing, making solitary routines feel intrinsically satisfying rather than compensatory. Men notice they no longer experience the same pull toward validation through romantic pursuit because the internal systems that once prioritized it have recalibrated toward mastery in controllable domains. This shift manifests in quicker recognition of incompatibility during early interactions where red flags around accountability or reciprocity trigger immediate boundary enforcement rather than rationalization. The process is not suppression, but refinement, where emotional energy channels into pursuits that deliver consistent returns, such as advanced skill acquisition, physical conditioning, or strategic planning for future security. Younger men entering this mindset earlier through observation bypass much of the trial and error, saving themselves cycles of investment that historically yielded diminishing returns. The authoritative edge comes from treating relationships as high risk allocations rather than defaults requiring exhaustive due diligence before any meaningful commitment. Evolutionary biology provides a lens for why these adaptations emerge so readily under modern conditions where traditional signals of mutual investment have been disrupted. Human mating strategies evolved around complementary strengths, with men specializing in resource provision and protection, while women focused on nurturing and selection for stability. When cultural and legal changes remove the reciprocal safeguards men historically relied upon, the adaptive response is strategic retreat to preserve genetic and personal lineage through self focused success rather than risky propagation. This mirrors behaviors observed in other species facing unstable environments where individuals prioritize survival and resource hoarding over reproduction until conditions stabilize. In the current landscape, men achieve status and capability through individual excellence, then selectively engage only when clear mutual benefit appears, which rarely materializes given prevailing incentive structures. Women who delayed pair bonding past peak fertility windows encounter the mismatch where their evolved preferences for established providers clash with the reality that those providers have already optimized for independence. The sobering implication is that biology continues operating beneath ideological overlays, producing outcomes that no amount of social engineering fully overrides, regardless of intent. Urban planning and living arrangements evolve to support the rise of single male households, emphasizing efficiency, privacy, and minimal maintenance. Men select locations and property types that facilitate self contained operations, from smart home integrations for automated security and climate control to proximity to essential services that reduce external dependencies. These choices reflect a philosophy of controlled minimalism, where space serves function and recovery rather than social display or family expansion. Neighborhood dynamics shift as concentrations of such households create microeconomies around male centric amenities like specialized gyms, tool sharing networks, or low drama social venues. The raw practicality shines through in how these environments minimize friction, allowing deeper focus on personal development and long term health trajectories. Women navigating similar solo urban living often report higher logistical burdens when managing spaces designed for dual roles, highlighting the architectural assumptions built into older community layouts. This divergence in habitat optimization further entrenches the separation of lifestyles as each group adapts infrastructure to their respective realities. Workforce participation patterns reflect the internal prioritization where men gravitate toward roles offering autonomy, high skill compensation, or entrepreneurial control rather than traditional corporate ladders that demand emotional labor or performative diversity compliance. Trades technology, specialized consulting, and independent ventures see increased male entry because these fields reward measurable output over relational navigation. The resulting economic independence reinforces withdrawal by providing resources that stay under personal control, avoiding scenarios where earnings become contested or redirected through unbalanced agreements. Career satisfaction metrics improve for those who align work with intrinsic motivations like problem solving, mastery, or tangible creation, reducing the need for external affirmation that relationships once supplied imperfectly. Broader labor market effects include talent concentration in certain sectors, alongside shortages in roles historically filled by men seeking stable family provider positions. The trend accelerates as younger cohorts witness the advantages of the selectivity shaping educational and vocational choices away from paths that expose them to high personal risk without commensurate reward. Scientific research into happiness and life satisfaction consistently shows divergent trajectories once men establish self reliant structures versus prolonged singlehood for women past certain age thresholds. Longitudinal studies capture how reduced relational volatility correlates with steadier cortisol levels, improved sleep architecture, and higher self reported purpose when men direct efforts towards self defined goals. These outcomes accumulate into extended health spans where cognitive sharpness and physical capability persist longer without the inflammatory effects of chronic interpersonal stress. Parallel data on women indicate elevated markers for mood dysregulation and social isolation when family formation windows close without alternative fulfillment mechanisms proving as robust as promised. The contrast is not about inherent superiority of one path, but the measurable consequences of mismatched timing and eroded mutual incentives. Acknowledging these patterns without moral overlay allows individuals to make informed projections about their own trajectories rather than following cultural scripts that delivered unexpected results for prior generations. Innovation in personal finance tools caters directly to the growing segment of men building solo empires with applications focused on automated investing, tax optimization, and asset protection strategies that shield against external claims. These technologies empower precise control over wealth accumulation, turning modest incomes into compounding security through disciplined allocation rather than high consumption lifestyles. Men leverage them to create multiple income streams that operate independently, reducing vulnerability to single points of failure, whether job loss or relational disruption. The approach embodies a raw conservatism toward resources earned through effort, viewing them as hard won territory to defend rather than casually shared. Educational content around these tools spreads rapidly in male spaces, emphasizing scenario planning for worst case legal or social contingencies. Women accessing similar resources often face different optimization challenges where career earnings must stretch across solo, retirement healthcare, and legacy considerations without the natural risk pooling of partnership. This financial divergence deepens the lifestyle gaps as one group fortifies buffers while the other manages stretched contingencies. Philosophical traditions emphasizing self sovereignty and rational egoism gain renewed relevance as men seek intellectual frameworks that validate their observed experiences over collectivist narratives. Thinkers who stressed personal responsibility and the dangers of unbalanced altruism provide language for articulating why withdrawal represents strength rather than defeat. Reading circles and discussion groups form around these ideas, translating ancient wisdom into contemporary strategies for boundary maintenance and value creation. The integration produces a grounded worldview where peace emerges from alignment between actions and evidence rather than hope for systemic reform. This intellectual maturation distinguishes the current wave of disengagement from earlier forms of dropout by pairing behavioral change with deliberate cognitive restructuring. The authoritative tone arises from treating life as a series of testable hypotheses where failed relational models lead to updated protocols rather than repeated attempts under identical conditions. Global migration and cultural exchange introduce additional variables as men relocate to jurisdictions offering stronger property rights, more neutral family laws, or economic environments favoring individual enterprise. Destinations with lower regulatory burdens and traditional value retention attract those seeking to reset incentives away from progressive strongholds where disengagement accelerated. These moves reflect strategic life design, where geography becomes another tool for optimizing outcomes. Host communities experience influxes of capable, self reliant individuals, contributing to local economies while maintaining low drama profiles. Women in origin countries note the accelerating departure of stable prospects, further intensifying regret narratives around timing and societal direction. The phenomenon illustrates how mobile populations vote with their feet when local conditions undermine core stability, creating pressure for policy adjustments in sending nations. The sobering reality is that human capital flows toward environments that reward rather than penalize responsible masculine traits. Artisanal and craft movements gain traction among men, redirecting creative energy into tangible production, whether woodworking, metalwork, or digital fabrication. These pursuits deliver satisfaction through visible mastery and functional beauty, providing outlets that once competed with relational maintenance. Online marketplaces and local makerspaces facilitate exchange within trusted networks, turning hobbies into supplemental income or pure personal enrichment without external gatekeeping. The process reinforces self sufficiency by transforming raw materials into valued objects under complete control. This renaissance in hands on creation counters narratives of male obsolescence by demonstrating continued relevance in domains requiring precision, patience, and innovation. Parallel trends among women lean toward different expressive forms, but often with greater emphasis on social validation components that tie back to unmet connection needs. The divergence highlights how redirected energy manifests uniquely across groups shaped by distinct priorities and constraints. Dietary and physiological optimization becomes central to the fortress lifestyle as men treat their bodies as primary assets requiring precise fueling and recovery protocols. Tracking applications, personalized nutrition plans, and recovery modalities allow fine tuning that maximizes energy, cognitive function, and longevity without reliance on external motivation. Many adopt regimens emphasizing whole foods, resistance training, and cyclical rest that deliver compounding resilience against age related decline. The discipline stems from recognition that physical capability underpins all other independence metrics, making neglect equivalent to voluntary vulnerability. Shared protocols spread through male communities, refining best practices based on real world results rather than generic guidelines. Women addressing similar solo health needs encounter additional hormonal and metabolic considerations that complicate optimization, especially post fertility peak, creating different baseline challenges. This bodily stewardship underscores the comprehensive nature of the withdrawal, where every domain receives intentional upgrade. The emergence of parallel economies within male spaces, from skill sharing platforms to informal barter networks, reduces dependency on mainstream systems perceived as hostile or extractive. Participants exchange value directly based on competence and reliability, bypassing intermediaries that add friction or ideological overhead. These ecosystems foster trust through demonstrated performance rather than credentials or social signaling, creating resilient microstructures resilient to larger disruptions. The raw efficiency comes from alignment between contribution and reward without unbalanced extraction. Broader society feels the pull as talent and resources concentrate in these voluntary associations, leaving legacy institutions to adapt or diminish. The trend represents decentralized adaptation, where men engineer environments that reward the traits cultural messaging sought to suppress. Women seeking entry encounter, filtering based on compatibility with these new norms, which prioritize fairness and accountability over empathy driven exceptions. Narrative control shifts as independent content creators document the lived experiences of walking away, reaching audiences hungry for unfiltered analysis. These voices compile data personal accounts and trend observations into coherent frameworks that resonate because they match observable reality rather than prescribed ideals. Distribution through alternative channels bypasses traditional gatekeepers, allowing raw dissemination of strategies for successful independence. The impact compounds as each new cohort enters with better maps than the last, reducing the learning curve dramatically. This informational evolution distinguishes the modern phenomenon by enabling conscious adaptation at scale. The authoritative quality stems from grounding in consequences rather than aspirations, creating content that functions as both warning and blueprint. Regret narratives from the other side provide contrasting data points, reinforcing the incentives for continued disengagement among those who calculate carefully. Legacy architecture extends beyond biological descendants through institutional design, where men establish trust foundations or enduring projects that reflect their values without exposure to relational volatility. These structures channel accumulated resources into causes or innovations that outlast individual lifespans, maintaining influence through careful legal construction. The approach satisfies generative drives while preserving control and minimizing risk of dissipation through adversarial claims. Implementation requires foresight in governance and succession planning, turning personal success into multiplied impact. This model contrasts with traditional family based legacy vulnerable to demographic and legal shifts. The strategy embodies long view thinking, where peace today enables contribution tomorrow on terms that honor earned autonomy. Women pursuing parallel legacy building describe greater emotional complexity when biological avenues close, prompting alternative, creative, or philanthropic expressions that carry different fulfillment profiles. The philosophical maturation culminates in a quiet acceptance that human societies cycle through periods of imbalance and recalibration, with individuals best served by navigating rather than resisting observable currents. Men who internalize this view direct energy toward personal domains of excellence, treating larger civilizational arcs as context to adapt within rather than crusades to lead. This stance produces equanimity that deepens the reported peace, allowing presence amid uncertainty. The sobering wake up call for broader audiences lies in recognizing that mass disengagement signals systemic misalignment, requiring honest diagnosis over symptom management. As each generation absorbs the lessons, the patterns evolve toward greater selectivity and self containment until conditions shift substantially. The raw truth remains consistent across all layers of analysis. Men have constructed viable alternatives that deliver what they need, and they continue refining those constructions without looking backward for validation or rescue. The geopolitical dimensions of this widespread male disengagement ripple into national competitiveness as countries with higher rates of committed family formation retain advantages in demographic stability and innovation pipelines fed by motivated provider mindsets. Nations that maintain clearer incentive structures around partnership and child rearing sustain workforce replenishment and social cohesion metrics that falter in environments where large cohorts of capable men opt for personal fortresses instead of collective investment. Policymakers in affected regions begin quietly studying adjustments to family law taxation and cultural signaling to stem the outflow of human capital, though implementation lags behind the speed of individual choices already locked in. Men tracking these macro shifts position themselves as mobile assets ready to align with jurisdictions that reward rather than penalize disciplined masculine contribution. This strategic awareness adds another layer of calculated autonomy where personal peace intersects with broader civilizational currents without requiring active political participation. The sobering takeaway is that societies ignoring the quiet exodus of their most self reliant builders eventually face innovation plateaus and support system strains that no short term stimulus can fully reverse. Ethical frameworks around consent and mutual obligation undergo silent redefinition as men insist on explicit ongoing agreements rather than assumed lifelong contracts vulnerable to unilateral reinterpretation. This insistence on verifiable reciprocity filters out dynamics prone to retroactive grievance, creating relationships that either meet high standards of fairness or dissolve early with minimal damage. The approach treats partnership as a living covenant subject to continuous evaluation instead of a one time vow enforced asymmetrically. Over time, It cultivates a subset of connections characterized by genuine alignment because both parties understand the exit costs and performance expectations up front. Women who adapt to this new clarity report stronger outcomes when they embrace the same transparency, though many still encounter friction when prior cultural conditioning emphasized emotional flow over contractual precision. The raw authority in this evolution stems from refusing to repeat historical imbalances where good faith investment met selective enforcement, leaving one side perpetually exposed. Technological augmentation of human capability accelerates the viability of independent living through advancements in artificial companions, personalized learning systems, and remote health monitoring that fill functional gaps without introducing interpersonal volatility. Men integrate these tools as force multipliers for cognitive, physical, and emotional regulation, maintaining high performance states with less external scaffolding. Virtual environments evolve into sophisticated training grounds for strategy creativity and social simulation, allowing practice without real world downside. The integration feels like extending the fortress perimeter into digital realms where control remains absolute and customization matches exact needs. This fusion of biology and technology reshapes what self sufficiency looks like, turning solitude into an optimized operating system rather than a stripped down existence. Broader adoption across male networks creates collective intelligence on best configurations, spreading effective protocols faster than traditional institutions can respond. Environmental consciousness takes on pragmatic forms as men who have walked away often pursue sustainable personal ecosystems that align resource efficiency with long term independence. They invest in renewable energy setups, localized food production, and waste reduction systems that minimize reliance on fragile supply chains prone to disruption. These choices reflect foresight about potential societal strains where self contained operations provide insulation against shortages or instability. The lifestyle embodies a grounded stewardship where personal ecology supports rather than competes with individual peace. Practical implementation turns theoretical concerns into daily engineering problems solved through competence and planning. Women addressing parallel sustainability in solo contexts navigate additional complexities when managing larger domestic loads without complementary labor division, underscoring how scale and support structures influence feasibility. This domain highlights another vector where deliberate design separates those thriving in withdrawal from those managing accumulated trade offs. Interpersonal filtering mechanisms grow increasingly sophisticated as men develop nuanced assessment protocols based on observable behavior patterns, consistency over time, and alignment with core values of accountability. Initial interactions serve as low stakes data collection phases where words receive secondary weight compared to actions under pressure or ambiguity. This methodical approach weeds out performative empathy or shifting goalposts before emotional or material investment accrues. Shared frameworks within male circles refine these filters through collective case studies, turning individual experience into transferable wisdom. The process protects peace by preventing re entry into dynamics that previously eroded it while leaving room for genuine connections that clear the elevated bar. The authoritative clarity comes from treating human interaction as an evidence based discipline, where past data informs present boundaries without cynicism clouding accurate perception. Transgenerational knowledge preservation shifts toward documented personal operating manuals where men compile lessons on finance, health, boundary setting, and decision heuristics for those who follow. These living documents capture hard won insights in practical actionable formats, bypassing diluted institutional advice. Digital archives and private distribution networks ensure transmission without mainstream gatekeeping, allowing each cohort to begin from higher baselines of preparedness. The practice transforms individual withdrawal into cumulative advantage, where peace today seeds greater autonomy tomorrow. Recipients inherit not just warnings, but proven architectures for replicating success across domains. This deliberate legacy building satisfies the drive for lasting impact through chosen channels resilient to demographic and legal uncertainties that affect more traditional paths. Sensory and experiential enrichment replaces relational intensity with deliberate cultivation of presence in nature, physical challenge, and aesthetic appreciation. Men allocate resources toward immersive travel, skill based adventures, and environmental mastery that deliver peak states without dependency on another person's participation or mood. These pursuits build resilience through direct confrontation with elements and self imposed discomfort, followed by recovery that reinforces internal locus of control. The richness emerges from depth within chosen experiences rather than breadth across obligatory social calendars. Sensory awareness heightens as chronic stress drops, allowing fuller engagement with simple pleasures like quality meals, natural landscapes, or crafted objects. This recalibration of fulfillment sources cements the sustainability of the chosen path because internal metrics consistently outperform external variables that proved unreliable. The ultimate philosophical closure arrives when men fully inhabit the realization that personal peace was never contingent on fixing societal mismatches, but on constructing parallel realities aligned with their wiring and evidence. This acceptance dissolves residual urgency around collective outcomes, freeing energy for masterful execution within self defined spheres. The sobering wake up call extends beyond individual lives to anyone observing the trend because it reveals the limits of top down engineering when it conflicts with evolved psychology and rational self interest. Future equilibria will form around whatever incentives emerge from this period of sorting and selection, where those who adapt thrive and those who cling to mismatched models bear the costs. The raw, straightforward truth, after all layers of analysis, is that men have located durable satisfaction through withdrawal and refinement, and they continue honing that satisfaction as the defining feature of their era. Societies wishing to reintegrate them must first restore conditions where participation makes rational sense rather than demanding sacrifice from those who already solved the equation on their own terms. Shout out to the 2 Hour Gang. If you have made it this far to the end of this deep dive, you are part of the 2 Hour Gang who sticks with the hard truths until the credits roll, and I appreciate every single one of you for facing this with open eyes. If you are enjoying these angry guy videos that cut straight through the illusions, you can show some support by buying me a Red Bull using the link in the description of the video. Tell me in the comments what you thought about what we discussed today, whether you agree with the patterns we unpacked, or if you see different angles playing out in your own circle. Drop your honest thoughts down there because this conversation only gets stronger when more voices add to it. Like the video, if you like it, do not forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MWA, men walking away in cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.